The following program is brought to you in conjunction with the folks at Grace to All with Paul Gray. Now we bring to you The Agape Guy Show with your host, Lenny Manning.
I'm banking everything I love.
We now present to you the host of the show, a man with experience in teaching, preaching, and music ministry in several different types of church groups. He also has experience in alternative church groups such as house church and organic church. Here is author, speaker, and host of the show, Lenny Manning.
Hello and welcome to The Agape Guy Show. I'm your host, Lenny Manning. I've been working through a new series I call Understanding the Duns, Series 2, Reassessing and Rebuilding. Today, I'm building on the last two episodes that were about church and community, and today is part 3 in this church-related series. For part 3, we are going to be looking at leaving a bad church group and experiencing church detox. First of all, what is church detox or detoxing from church, and why does it happen to people leaving church groups? So, let's take a minute to let me tell you about it. 1. What is church detox? For those who are not familiar with this subject, I'll try to describe what church detox is and what it involves. Detoxing is the difficulties a person goes through when they stop participating in their addiction of choice. Yet in this case, I'm not referring to physical withdrawal symptoms such as nausea or shaking. You might suffer from those when you stop taking drugs or quit drinking alcohol. Instead, church detox refers to the problems a person goes through after they see problems in a church group and then leave. It could be that they saw problems in a church they attended, or they saw problems in the whole institutional church system. It could also be that they left and don't feel led to go to any church groups, or any other church groups. So they don't go to church for a while. 2. Why do so many people go through church detox when they leave a church? And is it necessary to go through it? Well, this is a multifaceted question and a multifaceted discussion. I believe many people go through church detox due to being in a controlling, manipulative, or abusive church group. Therefore, when they get out of the group, they might find that reality is a bit different than their group led them to believe. So however big the difference in their view of reality is than what true reality is, it determines how harsh the detox will likely be. However large the amount of control and abuse was, that's likely how rough the church detox would likely be as well. Now, I saw this subject spoken about several years ago, and I wanted to look into it for myself. So I researched it a bit, and then noticed that my friends and I who left a rough church group started experiencing it. We seemed to be going through the same things that many other people had been going through. As I looked into this subject, I started to have a couple of questions of my own. Those questions were these. 1. Why do we need to go through church detox? And 2, why does it need to be so painful and difficult? I had to ask myself these questions because my detox was very painful, and it was painful to my friends as well. I've also seen a few friends go through church detox that was so painful and disruptive to their lives that they ended up in divorce. As I previously mentioned, I believe church detox is only as necessary and painful as the church was controlling and abusive. That mostly answered my questions. What led the church to be so controlling and abusive is a few things, but most recently it was the so-called shepherding movement. In the last few centuries, the church also got turned away from beliefs and teachings of Jesus and the apostles by some of its own foibles, and by the actions of emperors Constantine and Justinian. Several years ago, I went through church detox, and I noticed it was similar to detoxing from drugs and alcohol. It was very rough and very lonely. Yet I also noticed that it didn't have the same physical issues that drug detox had. Yet the psychological withdrawal symptoms were definitely present. I specifically noticed some symptoms that were present in people detoxing from church, and these were obvious symptoms. The symptoms from church detox that I've seen can include, but are not limited to these that I'm listing right here. These symptoms include 1. Emotional outbursts or just being irritable. 2. Inability to concentrate because your mind constantly wanders as you think about your experiences in the group. 3. Confused thinking. You can't quite figure out if the group you were in had great beliefs or terrible beliefs, or which was which and what was what. You can also have difficulty figuring out which beliefs are good beliefs and which are bad. It can get very confusing when you try to figure it all out. 4. Depression. We can have great difficulty finding answers, and we start to feel hopeless and like all of life is a wreck. That type of hopelessness leaves a person feeling very depressed. 5. Excess stress and anxiety. This can also lead to being irritable or depressed. 6. Nightmares. Sometimes we can be so stressed and confused that it leads to having nightmares. I had this problem after leaving a controlling group that I was in. I ended up having nightmares almost all night, every night for a solid year. 7. Marital instability. I'm referring to a greater degree of marital difficulty than is average for an average married couple. Many couples argue, and that's simply a part of life as you try to work things out in life as you live together. I'd also say that the chronic irritability from detox can last a long time and cause excessive arguing and conflict. This often ends in divorce, and I've seen this on plenty of occasions. Number 8. Recidivism cravings. I'm referring to the desire to return to your addiction of choice. So with this situation, it's the desire to visit another similar type of controlling and abusive church group. Now, first of all, if you're considering leaving a church group, then do it quietly without confronting the leadership. Confrontation almost never changes the leadership's minds. It only leads to heated arguments, hard feelings, and broken relationships. None of that will help the situation, and none of that will show God's love or promote God's love, so it's a fruitless endeavor. Then, as you leave, you might find yourself dealing with difficulties that indicate you're going through church detox. Some folks might even ask, do we need to go through some type of church detox? Some people go through this type of detox and it gets really rough, and they ask, does it need to be so rough? Well, let's look at why it's rough and try to find answers as to why it's so rough. I think it gets worse the further from reality the group's teachings are, or the more abusive the group is, or the leadership is. So the bigger the problem the group had, the worse the transition away from it will be. So we might need to look into ways we can heal from the negative effects of the detox, or heal at a faster pace. Yet we do need to have full healing and not to stop at a partial healing or stop the detox by returning to our addiction of choice, especially if it's an addiction to religion or religious activity. Speaking of which, I recently heard a theologian say that all 4 main quadrants of Christianity are a mess. That includes Roman Catholic, Eastern Orthodox, Protestant, and Anabaptist groups. So it seems like it's all a bit of a mess. So if you came out of a group that's a bit of a mess, you aren't alone. Many of us have. So if you feel the need to leave a church, you're in good company, since at least 6 million people leave every year. Statistics and polls show that 1 million people on every highly populated continent in the world leave every year. So that's where the number adds up to 6 million. I think there's a few basic things that knock the church off course, which I'll list here. 1. People saw some post-apostolic writers become famous and were held in high regard, so others wanted to be considered great teachers and authors as well. This led people to want to be considered in the same way. This gradually led people to want to be hierarchical leaders and act as lords over others, which is what Jesus taught against. Number 2, Constantine's institutionalizing of church and forcing it into a building with hierarchical leadership caused a lot of problems too. 3, we can see that Emperor Justinian forced Christians to change their beliefs under threat of death. He forced them to believe in eternal conscious torment in hell and turn away from beliefs in universal reconciliation. That's when those beliefs changed and the church's theological opinions changed over the next few years and the next few centuries. That's how the church got off course. I think it's good to see what knocked the church off course so we can correct it. We need to see that, 1, those of us in the church shouldn't act as lords over others. 2, we shouldn't be forced to sit in a church service and listen to a type of one-way lecture style sermon. That will only teach us to sit down, shut up, and do nothing. It leads us to be passive and never live out our beliefs. And 3, we need to re-examine and reassess our views on hell and universal reconciliation, especially considering the early church believed the opposite of what most churches believe these days. That's why many church groups don't see the reality of the situation and that reassessing our views can cause detox. There is a vast difference between typically accepted church beliefs and the reality that history shows as the truth of what the church believed, or the early church believed. So in my opinion, however big that gap is between the lies and the truth of reality, that's how rough the church detox will be. As I left the last church I attended a few years ago, I started detoxing, and here's what I experienced. I tried visiting other church groups for years, but I never felt accepted since I believed in God's love. Church leaders refused to accept the idea that God was loving, and they actually fought against it. Once I saw that scenario several times, I eventually just gave up. It was extremely lonely for a while, but I also realized that I couldn't go back to status quo church as usual, especially since status quo church as usual was mostly incompatible with living by God's love. It also became incompatible with studying the Bible on my own, maturing at my own pace, and reading lots of different types of books. If I would have revealed the stuff I was learning to a typical conventional church pastor, they would have lost their cool and they would have gotten really angry. They would likely get angry with me and tell me I was rebelling against God, the Bible, the church, and church leadership, etc., etc., etc. Even the rare preachers who seemed to believe in God's love didn't like dealing with the subjects I was reading about. I was reading house church books that showed how typical church groups' beliefs and practices were a bit off kilter. Typical church leaders didn't want to hear any of that type of stuff. I was also reading my Bible and seeing how many things that typical churches taught didn't align with the Bible. As I later learned that there might not be any eternal conscious torment in hell, I couldn't go back to a typical church. Discussing that would only lead to arguments and hard feelings between other people. As I learned about universal reconciliation, I again realized that I couldn't go back to a typical church group. I realized that if I attended a typical church, I couldn't learn on my own without the leadership giving harsh rebukes. Otherwise, I'd need to constantly keep my mouth shut and never reveal what I was learning. I couldn't talk about what I was reading, nor could I reveal that I was studying controversial subjects on my own. The last church I had attended was where I told a guy about God's love, and he told me I sounded totally unbiblical. I showed him that I was only referring to a book that was supposed to give foundational beliefs of that church we were both attending. So at that point, I lost all interest in that group and didn't feel like going through all the same old arguments all over again, especially since I just left a church due to those exact same problems. So, if church detox is nearly as bad as detoxing from drugs and alcohol, let's look at some ways to bring some healing. I've seen some people's journey through church detox take anywhere from a few months to a few decades. It seems to depend on how a person confronts their problems and learns the solutions or learns how to heal. It also seems to depend on how dedicated a person is to the healing process and how much they stick to the healing process. I've tried to put a list together of some of the ways to heal that I could think of, and I put them into a list. Here's some of the things I put in my list. 1. Read books that help you heal from abusive groups. Some of those books include books like this. 1. Healing Spiritual Abuse and Religious Addiction by Matthew Lynn, Sheila Fabricant Lynn, and Dennis Lynn. 2. Recovery from Cults by Michael D. Langone. And 3. Combating Cult Mind Control by Stephen Hassan. Now, that brings us to number 2 on our list of things to help us heal from church detox. 2. It can help to read books that help you understand tough issues a bit better. Some of those might be the list of books I just named to help you heal. Some of it might be books that help you understand good views of some tough issues. I mean issues like looking into God's love, God's goodness, whether there's really eternal conscious torment in hell or not, or universal reconciliation. You might also want to read any books that show why typical church beliefs end up with abusive leadership. One book that helped me with that is the book by Rob McAlpine, which is titled Post-Charismatic 2.0, Rekindle the Smoldering Wick. Mr. McAlpine did some research into the shepherding movement, and his research was pretty good. He shows some of the severe problems with the shepherding movement and what the shepherding movement brought into the church. It might also help if you are willing to reassess your beliefs and have an open mind that's willing to learn. I had to do a lot of reassessing on several different beliefs. One was whether church attendance is mandatory and the problems with people's interpretations of Hebrews 10:25. I believe that the verse means something quite different than most people might think. I read some information from a few other people that showed that this verse meant something else. You can see that what I'm talking about here. If you look up the episode of the Agape Guy show on YouTube on my channel, you might look up the episode Season 1, Episode 10, titled Understanding the Duns, Part 2, Reassessing Mandatory Church Attendance. I also had to do some research into the issue of eternal conscious torment in hell. A book that helped me was a book titled Hope Beyond Hell by Gary Bocheman. You can find it on Amazon, or you can also find a legitimate free audiobook version as well. The free audiobook can be found on a website called learnoutloud.com. You might need to sign up for a free account, but you can then look up the title in their search box. You should be able to find it and get the free download. I also had to do a lot of research into something called universal reconciliation. I didn't believe in it at first, or the first time I heard about it, yet I was willing to listen to see if anyone could give me some reasonable evidence in favor of it. As I listened to the first person I heard talk about it, I found that they did give a bit of evidence for it. I then heard other people give more evidence, and it was quite persuasive, so that's why I changed to believing in it. If you want a good book that shows some good evidence for universal reconciliation, I have a friend who has a book on Amazon. The book is titled Why I Had to Consider Universal Reconciliation. That's by the author known as an anonymous follower of Jesus. My friend showed that many people who hear about universal reconciliation think those people are Unitarians, but in reality they're not. There are actually over 30 different types of universalism. Universal reconciliation is only one of them. He also shows that many of the early Christians believed in some form of universal reconciliation. He also showed some long lists of 100 Bible verses that support it. He also showed some other things that pointed toward universal reconciliation. He also lists a few other good books at the end and the back of the book. Those are more books about universal reconciliation and more books that teach against eternal conscious torment in hell. I'll see if we can put those lists of books on the screen right now. Another big thing that helped me was learning about the goodness of God and how it aligned with God's love. If you want to learn more about that, I'd recommend you look at Richard Murray's website, which is called thegoodnessofgod.com. Richard Murray has plenty of free books he wrote, as well as articles and audio recordings where he taught people about God's goodness. I'd recommend listening to those. I listened to all of them, and as I got to the last two, I finally started understanding what he was trying to say. I'd recommend those to everybody. This brings me to number 3 in our list of things to help us heal from church detox. 3. Get psychological counseling if you need it. If you have problems with excess stress or problems with depression, then talk to a psychologist, especially if you can find one who's good at dealing with religious trauma. Number 4, get post-cult counseling if you need it. Now, if you think the group you were in was a cult, then get post-cult counseling. If you think the group you were in was highly controlling or abusive, you might check into post-cult counseling as well. I've also seen some groups on the internet who can help you find a counselor for this type of counseling. They can give you preliminary questions to see if this type of counseling is right for you. You can look those up on the internet. Number 5, if you have friends you can confide in, then talk to them. If not, then talk to a psychologist. Otherwise, find good videos or podcasts that can help you heal. Find some that help you find good information to help you in your healing process. You might also want to find help to reassess your beliefs. You might also want to try to find people on social media who can help you as well. 6. Learn to spot and recognize controlling tactics that abusive church leaders use and learn to walk away from those groups, especially when you see them separate you from your family. You should also beware of groups that don't allow you to speak up for yourself, don't allow you to openly ask questions, or question the leadership. Those are very controlling and abusive groups. Now, sociological manipulation is where people try to take you away from your family and friends. They might even try to get you to move to another city or another part of the country. They might be near a college campus and try to get students to move off campus to live with their group. Psychological manipulation usually involves a few tactics to get you to stop questioning the leadership. It can involve yelling at you, demanding that you stop questioning the leadership. They might say that you supposedly don't have the right to question them. It can also involve groupthink. Everyone in the group will try to push you to do things their way. They might even shun you or get angry with you when you don't do things their way. Number 7, try not to listen to people who try to make you angry and outraged against other groups. They do this to get you to stay with their group only. Many people take the pros and cons of a group and exaggerate them. They will try to make those other religious groups seem many times worse and make their own group seem many times greater. Try not to fall for that type of manipulation. Try to do your own research as best as you can. If you think people are trying excessively hard to pressure you into their group, then get away from those folks. Don't let people pressure you into anything. If a group wants you to hear their rhetoric, but not do your own homework on the issue, that's a bad sign. If they want you to read only their material or only listen to their leaders, that's another bad sign. So do your homework and keep God's agape love as your highest priority. Now, before I end the show, I'd like to give you an announcement. I'd like to say that I have a private Facebook group for folks that have a lot of questions. They might be questions about reassessing their beliefs, deconstructing and reconstructing, or tough questions about the Bible. I made the group to help folks who are searching for answers and to help folks get a bit of fellowship with each other. I think this group can be an encouragement as we try to focus on God's love. So on that note, before I end the show, let me give you a word of encouragement. Even if we goof up in life, God still loves us. As the verses Romans 8:38 and 39 shows us, nothing can separate us from the love of God. Then again, as 1 John 4:8 says, God is love, and that means love is God's nature. Then as 1 Corinthians 13:5 shows, God in His love doesn't keep a record of our wrongs. So you will always be loved, and nothing can hold back God's love. So if you're going through a rough church detox or difficulties in life, what Corrie ten Boom said is still true. She said this, quote, "There is no pit so deep that God's love is not deeper still," end quote. That's something we all need to remember. Yet, as for now, I'm Lenny Manning saying, I hope to see you in the next episode of The Agape Guy Show. Goodbye for now.
I'm banking everything on love. I'm banking everything on love. I see the flags unfurl and they're blowing the other way. I see the anchor rising and the ship